military doing? Were they inciting violence? What can you tell us, Mr. Director?
This is a great example of the president's initiative to solve all the answers on January 6th. And it's another example of our transparency efforts. Pursuant to the president, we investigated the matter and found out why FBI agents were placed there in the first place. And it turns out we found documentation and witnesses and whistleblowers that said we were forced to go there to do riot control. Armstrong, do you know what the FBI does not do ever? Riot control. We don't do that. So the prior leadership sent 250 some odd men and women into a situation they're not trained for, put them in harm's way, put the individuals.
I thought he was going to get into the Southern Poverty Law Center there as well, but that alone is proof positive, folks. At the highest levels of our government, they are agitating for a civil war. Wow. LeoHolman.com, LeoHolman.substack.com. Take care.
You're watching Worldview 2, built on the 35 years of Worldview books, documentaries, research, high-profile interviews, and the radio and television broadcasts of Brannon House.
Is first and most important priority. That's what it is. Only in recent decades did politicians somehow come to believe that our job is to police the far reaches of Kenya and Somalia, while America is under invasion from within. We're under invasion from within. No different than a foreign enemy, but more difficult in many ways because they don't wear uniforms. At least when they're wearing a uniform, you can take them out. These people don't have uniforms. But we are under invasion from within. We're stopping it very quickly.
Welcome back to More War Monday. The Rob Maness Show's live on Worldview Tube and RX Spaces simulcast. Well, America's new national defense strategy, it's on the way, and it's already in action, even though the drafting process continues, of course. The usual suspects are out there, like the Washington Post, continue to publish anonymously sourced hit pieces, especially on departments like the War Department that has a large budget, a vast bureaucracy, and Secretary Hegseth has generated a lot of, quote, concerns since taking office and implementing the president's new America First national defense strategy. Well, these last few days have been no different. The Post is reporting, and I quote, military leaders have raised serious concerns about the Trump administration's new national defense, forthcoming national defense strategy, exposing a divide between the Pentagon's political and uniformed leadership as Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth summons top brass to a highly unusual summit in Virginia on Tuesday. According to 8 current and former officials, the critiques from multiple top officers, including supposedly General Dan Kane, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, come as Secretary Hegseth reorders U.S. military priorities in accordance with the president, I will add, centering the Pentagon on perceived threats to the homeland, narrowing U.S. competition with China, and downplaying America's role in Europe and Africa. Close quote. With my additions. Well, my guest today is Dan Caldwell, and he knows more than most how all this stuff works. Dan's a U.S. Marine Corps Operation Iraqi Freedom veteran. He's the former executive director of Concerned Veterans for America, a former U.S. House staffer, and the former senior advisor to Secretary of War Pete Hegseth. Dan, welcome to the Rob Maness Show, sir.
Rob, I'm honored to be on. Thank you for having me.
I appreciate you coming on. I know you're very busy, man, but you know, I wanted to do this show with you because there are very few people that understand even the term national defense strategy. let alone the process that goes with it. And I apologize for reading that quote from the Washington Post, but I think it's important that that's pretty much standard fare when we're going through these kind of processes, especially early in an administration that's won a big victory, isn't it?
Correct. Every administration puts out a national defense strategy in conjunction with a larger national security strategy. The national defense strategy is more focused on what now the Department of War is going to do, while the national security strategy incorporates the whole host of foreign policy tools like state and economic power. But the national defense strategy is an important document that an administration usually does early in the term that helps define the priorities and therefore the resourcing for the Pentagon and the military as a whole. And the national defense strategy drafting process began several months ago. It began after the Undersecretary for Defense Policy, Bridge Colby, was confirmed. And then prior to that, there was an interim national defense strategy that we implemented right as President Trump was inaugurated. And it is a important document because it really is important to setting the priorities and the focus for the military over the next 4 years. And if there's a president that shares the views of this administration following it, for that administration as well too, if they largely stick with the national defense strategy. Now, one thing I just really want to emphasize, Rob, and I think you were getting at this in your opening monologue, is that what is going on here is that there are people attempting to influence the drafting process, attempting to impede it or to push it in a direction based on what they would like to see. And these are likely people within the Pentagon who are career civilian officials or career military officers that don't agree with what the president and the Secretary of War want to do. And this is a trick that, Rob, I know you spent some time in the Pentagon. I know you've seen it. I saw it my short time in the Pentagon as they're trying to get ahead of things to try and scare this administration away from pursuing a more America first foreign policy and a more America first national defense strategy. So when you see these leaks, just keep in mind that's what they're trying to do here. They're trying to throw this administration off course and get it to move away from the promises it made to the American people during the election.
Are folks correct if they see this kind of activity, Dan, and just make an assumption that the people trying to get this get their view forward are happier with just no change instead of the change that this particular president wants to see?
Absolutely. The status quo is the safest thing in the Pentagon. Preserving the status quo is the best thing for your career. It's the best thing for your post-retirement job, whether it's at a defense contractor, at a think tank, or working for a foreign government. It's really the easiest thing to do. And that is why I think that there's a lot of resistance inside the Pentagon to reprioritizing the focus of the United States military away from these endless wars in places like the Middle East, away from subsidizing wealthy European allies in Europe, and they're trying to keep things as they existed under the Biden administration, under the Obama administration, under the Bush administration. They don't want to see a greater focus in the Western Hemisphere. They don't want to see a true shift to the Pacific. They will see, they'll pay lip service to it, but at the end of the day, it's much easier to just tinker on the margins than make truly revolutionary changes to our defense policy. And so, that was one of my biggest takeaways from my time in the Pentagon was that people get comfortable and just maintaining the status quo is often the easiest thing for anyone to do.
Yeah, being tagged with the moniker of disruptor can be the kiss of death if you're a dweller of the Pentagon for an entire career.
Well, Rob, it's funny. They like to use that term disruptor. It's very Silicon Valley speak, and I'm really glad you brought this up because you saw this with the Marine Corps. Is that you'd have all these Marine Corps generals show up at these big think tank conferences, these big tech conferences, these big forums, and they talk about, Marine Corps innovation and how the Marines need to be on the cutting edge, and how our history had, was always one of being a fighting organization that was innovating on the battlefield. But then when you have a commandant, come out and do something like Force 2030, which was a pretty radical redesign of the United States Marine Corps. And it was recognizing some hard facts about where the United States resources are, about our capabilities, and the fact that we were still oriented to fight another Desert Storm or Operation Iraqi Freedom 1, which is an invasion of Iraq. So what happens is that you have the Marine Corps come out, you have a very brave commandant come out and embrace these pretty radical reforms. And almost every living Marine Corps general attacks him, including ones that had called for the Marine Corps to be the disruptive branch, to be the innovators. And they attacked the Marines that were driving these reforms. And so they love to talk about it. They love to talk about change and reform and disrupting and innovation. But when it comes time to actually do it, they wuss out and they attack the people with the courage to go ahead and actually follow through with the things that they've been talking about for decades.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because my favorite person that's worn a uniform is John Boyd, and his term creative destruction. Really, I mean, I understand the OODA loop and all that. Everybody gloms onto that, but the term creative destruction that John Boyd developed, and the ideas that go into that, even the Marine Corps embraced him as a hero, but he didn't make general. And he would tell people, hey, Tiger, you're going to have a choice to make here in the Pentagon at some point. One is, you're either going to do something or you're going to be somebody. And that's the question everybody's got to answer for themselves. And it's much harder to do something because people want to succeed in their own right when they really need to be working for the betterment of the institution and the defense of the country. Before we get to this first break, Dan, on the new NDS, I like that the president, I led with that clip because he says it outright. Protecting our homeland is the military's number one priority. It's their number one job. Right. Why do people seem surprised that protecting the homeland, which includes everything from the border we've seen, which I think is a phenomenal idea, using the U.S. Armed Forces, to now pushing back into the Western Hemisphere in more of a Monroe Doctrine-like status? Why are folks surprised and pushing back on that?
Well, I think there's a couple reasons. I think first, going back to the idea of preserving the status quo, there's another element to that. Most of these military officers, and look, there's a lot of great military officers serving in the Pentagon, and a lot of great civilian staff as well, too. But there's a lot of people who made their careers in places like Europe and the Middle East, and they have a vested interest in preserving a focus there, either because they have a still affinity for the region, or that's where their skill sets are. And so if the United States, shifts its focus or deprioritizes those regions, then in their minds, sometimes they will view it as like, well, I'm going to be less useful to the Pentagon or the military going forward, or I'm going to have to learn more about a new region. But I think there's also this broader idea that really in the post-Cold War era, the purpose of the United States military in a lot of people's minds has moved away from the entity that was responsible for preserving our physical safety and the conditions of our economic prosperity here at home, to being this entity that goes around the world crusading for liberal democracy, that it is a global police force for liberalism, not even for the United States, but for this idea of this global rules-based international order that is rooted in liberalism. And so the idea that our military should be focused on defending our homeland where our most vital interests exist really is alien to a lot of people that have come up within the national security establishment in the post-Cold War era. And that might sound bizarre, Rob, to a lot of your listeners, but I think you and I both, in our experience in the military and in the Pentagon and in and around the foreign policy space, We've seen a lot of those people up close, and that's really unfortunate that a lot of them think that way.
Yeah, in the 3 decades that I served, I saw the Cold War at its height. Then the wall came down. Then we had this period where, hey, let's open up even more to China and give them everything we know, including miniaturization technology for nuclear warheads for reentry vehicles on missiles. Uh, and then 9/11 happened, and of course everybody knows what happened there. But what my point with all that, before I go to the break, is that after the Cold War ended, the war plan, the big plan that everybody knows about from the movies and everything, was essentially static for a very, very, very long time because the individuals that ran that war plan were civilians that stayed in place, and they would bring those military guys and gals in every couple of years, and that's what they would train them on. Instead of looking forward and saying, hey, here's what we've got to do now to be prepared for the future, because what we're doing now is in the past. We'll be right back with Dan Caldwell here on the Rob Maness Show. It's More War Monday, and we're talking national defense strategy. And you're going to see how serious the president is in this next segment about China. It'll be obvious in the opening clip. We'll be right back.
Hello, I'm Brandon House. I want to thank you for all your support at wvwfoundation.com that helps make possible pushing out 24/7 content for free. Without your support, we'd have to put it all behind a paywall. But thanks to you and your support through our foundation, we're able to push it out for free as a broadcast service and broadcast ministry of WVW Foundation. Please consider going there and setting up an automatic monthly contribution, or go there and make an occasional contribution. If you prefer to support us through the mail, you'll find our mailing address there at wvwfoundation.com. You can also call and make your contribution over the phone by calling 901-825-0652. That's 901-825-0652. Again, all these details are available at wvwfoundation.com. Thank you for your support as we try to help people around the world understand the times through the lens of a Christian worldview.
I think we should maybe start thinking about battleships, by the way. You know, we have a Secretary of the Navy came to me because I look at the Iowa out in California, and I look at different ships and the old pictures. I used to watch Victory at Sea. I love Victory at Sea. Look at these admirals. It's got to be your all-time in black and white. And I look at those ships. They came with the destroyers alongside of them, and man, nothing was going to stop. They were 20 deep, and they were in a straight line, and there was nothing going to stop them. And we actually talk about, you know, those ships. Some people would say, no, that's old technology. I don't know. I don't think it's old tech. But it's something we're actually considering, the concept of battleship. Nice 6-inch sides, solid steel, not aluminum. Aluminum that melts if it looks at a missile coming at it. Starts melting as the missile's about 2 miles away. Now, those ships, they don't make them that way anymore. But you look at it, and your secretary likes it, and I'm sort of open to it. And bullets are a lot less expensive than missiles. A lot of reasons.
Welcome back to the Rob Maness Show. It's More War Monday. We're talking the new national defense strategy of the Trump administration that Secretary of War Pete Hegseth and his team, led by Undersecretary of Defense Elbridge Colby, is in the process of formalizing and putting it together. But you're seeing it, and you just heard the president there from just days ago when talking to all the generals and admirals, and how serious he is about sea power. And what he didn't say there is China. The Communist Chinese Party, the People's Republic of China, any way you want to put it, it's China, the adversary that we need to be focusing on the most here in the United States. But he's telling you, and he's telling them, that he is thinking about it, and he's dead serious about it by actually opening the discussion up about new battleships. And my guest today is former senior advisor to Secretary Hegseth, Dan Caldwell, and Operation Iraqi Freedom experienced Marine Corps veteran too. Dan, the clip there, he didn't say China. He didn't even say carriers. He talked about battleships, which has a lot of people stirred up. especially the folks that keep looking in the rearview mirror instead of looking for the future and thinking about, well, what would a 21st century battleship and fleet with those types of ships be able to do? And one of the things we need to be able to do is control all of our lines of communication and lines of logistics and information in the Pacific if we ever get in a fight with China, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And despite the fact it's been clear for several decades now that China was likely to be our main competitor, likely to pose a real security challenge to us, is that in a lot of ways we neglected the key capabilities and services that would be at the forefront of a war with China, in particular, the United States Navy and the United States Air Force.
Hmm.
During the war on terror, we actually shrunk our Navy significantly by tens of thousands of sailors. We canceled a lot of shipbuilding programs, or we scaled them back significantly. And likewise, I know, Colonel Maness, you know this, is that we had to retire a lot of tactical aircraft. We had to retire early some even strategic aircraft like the B-1 bomber, which I know you're very familiar with, because we overused them in the war on terror, or we prioritized investments in things to fight the brush fire counterinsurgency wars. So we've been really behind the curve on investing in new naval ships and in maintaining our shipbuilding capability. So we're at a point now where we really need to catch up. It's no longer a choice. It's absolutely essential to our survival as a nation. Naval power has been at the center of our military power since our founding. So specifically in terms of the types of capabilities that we should be looking at is, I think first and foremost, I didn't hear President Trump talk about this in his speech in Quantico, but I believe others did yesterday at the celebration of the United States Navy, is we really need to scale up our submarine production. That's an area where we've really fallen behind in, but that's also an area in terms of production, we still maintain a technological edge. And we also need to think of building systems that we can build in more scale. Instead of more $13 billion aircraft carriers, we need to look at cheaper, potentially autonomous systems that we can produce in large numbers that could really help both, first and foremost, deter the Chinese. But if we get in a conflict with them, that we can control key shipping lanes, sea lanes, and other strategic points in the Pacific more effectively. But unfortunately, that is an area where we're really far behind. But luckily, this administration recognizes it, and that's why they're making such a big priority around shipbuilding and naval innovation.
Yeah, it seems, Dan, like, and I have to be transparent. I'm a Naval War College graduate, and I'm a bomber Air Force officer. So I have a foot in both of these camps. But it seems like we've forgotten what it took to control the vast Pacific Ocean during World War II, and it's not like the technology we have today is going to make that any easier. Although, our shooters and our reconnaissance and surveillance and intelligence systems can be made to the point now today where we can get really good situational awareness 24/7, 365, where we couldn't do that in World War II. But you still, like boots on the ground in a land battle, you still have to be able to control the seas, right? And that's I think. Do you think that we need to make sure we're looking at that as we look forward and think about concepts like a new type of battleship and these autonomous vessels and those kind of things, so that we are putting our foot forward in the right way instead of going with the latest bells and whistles? That's what I'm concerned about.
Well, you're absolutely right. We do need to be innovating on the technology front, but it doesn't change the fact that for the foreseeable future, you're still going to need sailors on combat warships patrolling the seas. And that likely is not going to change for a very long time, if ever. And, interestingly, you're seeing something similar play out in Ukraine, where there's this assumption that the Ukrainians who are suffering, significant manpower shortages are going to be able to make up for those manpower shortages with drones and other autonomous systems. But that's that is only going to go so far, and they're still going to need troops manning a line, holding cities and towns. And likewise, in a naval environment, you're still going to need a certain number of ships manned by a certain number of sailors. And you can't just have one big ship or one big battle group controlling such a vast space as the Pacific Ocean. I think a lot of times we forget how big the Pacific is. But there's, on the other hand, there is also some truth is that a potential conflict in the Pacific will be confined to some key areas. First and foremost, the Taiwan Strait, South China Sea, and some other key islands. But that brings up another problem, and that, in terms of distance, is the logistical tail there of how do you maintain these forces that are really so far away from the United States? What do you pre-stage? What do you have in theater? What do you move into theater after the conflict begins? And that is what the national defense strategy and other things that are going on in parallel to that are ultimately going to look at.
Yeah, that you led me to my next two questions, really, and that is the strategy going to take a really hard look at the non-sexy parts of the maritime piece, and the sea lift ships, and can we make them autonomous? Can we build enough? I mean, our manufacturing is just not where it needs to be. We need more shipyard yards and increasing the size and capability and throughput of the existing shipyards, because the Chinese, I mean, they outbuild us over 1,700 ships to one when it comes to maritime sea lift ship.
I mean, there's part of me that wonders sometimes if there were certain parts of the previous administrations just kind of gave up on this problem. We're in such a hole when it comes to not just naval warship building, but military sea lift command shipbuilding. And we lack enough of critical types of vessels, that can transport everything from fuel to munitions to combat vehicles and so on and so forth. And yes, there are some smart people that are working on some autonomous solutions and things like that. But unfortunately, it's an area where we're really far behind. So that leads us to the question of, well, what do you do about that? And that gets into the more challenging part of this national defense strategy, and why I think a lot of people are really freaked out, is that it's going to require us to do less in other places. Is we are going to have to not completely withdraw from the rest of the world and ignore everything that isn't in the Western Hemisphere or Pacific, but we're going to have to push more of the burden to our European allies. We're going to have to push more of the burden to our partners in the Middle East, and recognize that we don't have as many interests there as maybe a lot of people have said for the last 20 years. So doing less in those regions frees up resources for the more critical areas, which is first and foremost the Western Hemisphere, our homeland, and then the Pacific. So because we have these unfortunate gaps in our ability to build ships and airplanes and other munitions, inevitably leads us to a place we're going to have to do less. And just one quick thing on the being able to move stuff across the Pacific, not only in the realm of shipbuilding are we behind, but Rob, I think is that we currently don't have a long range transportation aircraft in production. The C-17, right. The last C-17 that was produced, I believe, was in 2015. The replacement for the C-5 is still in the design phase. We have the C-130 that is still in production, but that is not a aircraft that is capable of hauling a lot of stuff over a vast distance. So that's another major problem here that constrains us in a theater like the Pacific. We don't have enough aircraft either.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And we don't have enough strategically located airfields so we can disperse those forces that we may need to forward deploy and still be able to fly, say, bomber missions from home, but recover them somewhere else that's still available after an attack from the Chinese. Because when you look at it, we have stayed so far with most of the same bases that air base wise that the U.S. had during the Cold War. I think we're working on Tinian Island to bring that airfield as a strategic airfield back up to speed. But that's not nearly enough. And alongside the sea lift capability and ship manufacturing that we need to increase, we need to increase our ability to disperse our aircraft, plus build up those logistics sites using air power in addition to the sea power. But there's only one thing that moves fuel, jet fuel, well enough, though, and that's sea lift. And that's why I lose sleep at night over that.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, you know that better than I do, and at the end of the day, that's why in the Cold War, and we still do have some of these capabilities, the maritime pre-positioning squadrons and other resources pre-positioned, but we had a significant amount of munitions and pre-staged equipment in Europe, and the plan was reforger, particularly in the European theater, is that you would fly the troops to meet up with their equipment and pre-staged supplies, and then they'd resupply probably with another Battle of the Atlantic type situation like you saw in World War I and World War II. The ships would then resupply from there. But the how much our military consumes in modern warfare, again, is something I don't think a lot of people have absorbed, and the challenges of sustaining our troops in extended periods of combat. And that was even a challenge, in the Gulf War, when we were coming off of the Reagan defense buildup. We had arguably the strongest, most well-trained military in the post-World War II era at that point. And still, it took nearly 6 months to get all the assets in place to launch the war against Saddam's Iraq in 1991. And we are in much, much worse shape in those capabilities than we were back then. And, again, the good news is I think the current secretary, I know the current secretary and administration know that, but we have a lot of work to do, and it's going to require some really tough decisions and some tough battles of the bureaucracy to fix it.
Yeah, absolutely right. I don't think people understand that just Strategic Air Command, which still existed then, had 600 B-52s and around 400 air refueling tankers alone at the beginning of the Gulf War. That's not even counting the bombs and bullets and people and those kind of things. So Dan, we got to take another break. When we come back, I want to dive into this Western Hemispheric push just a second to give folks an idea that this is just not about drug cartels, and it's not about countries like Venezuela alone. It is also about China and what they've been doing in the world with their Belt and Road Initiative and trying to control things like the Panama Canal. We'll be right back with Dan Caldwell.
You woke up with a sore throat and a low-grade fever. You know you are getting sick, so here's your choices. You can get sicker and miss work. Try to see a doctor this week, or sit hours in a crowded waiting room at urgent care.
I have a smarter option for you. Open your medical emergency kit. Match your symptoms to doctor-recommended prescription in your booklet and take the right meds now and get well faster.
This is not a first aid kit. It's like having an urgent care in your home. It includes doctor-prescribed medications to treat over 39 medical issues like respiratory infections, strep throat, pneumonia, UTIs, and more.
No waiting to see the doctor and no standing in line at the pharmacy. It's right here.
Every home should have at least one medical emergency kit, and here's how to order.
Go to worldviewhealthcare.com. Your kit to treat dozens of common and serious illnesses is rushed to your door. worldviewhealthcare.com. That's worldviewhealthcare.com.
The emergency kit available at worldviewhealthcare.com. Make sure you don't have to go to urgent care. I got pneumonia. I didn't have to go. I took this last year. Stayed at home. Went to bed.
In recent weeks, the Navy has supported our mission to blow the cartel terrorists the hell out of the water. You see that? And there are no boats in the water anymore. We can't find any. We're having a hard time finding them. But, it's a pretty tough thing we've been doing, but you have to think of it this way. Every one of those boats is responsible for the death of 25,000 American people and the destruction of families. So when you think of it that way, what we're doing is actually an act of kindness. But we did another one last night. Now we just can't find any. You know, it's the old story. We're so good at it that there are no boats. In fact, even fishing boats, nobody wants to go into the water anymore. Sorry to tell you that. But it's we're stopping drugs coming into America, if that's okay. We're stopping drugs at a level that nobody's ever seen before. Last year, we lost, I believe, 300,000 people. And that's not talking about the destruction to families. Every one of us knows families that have been destroyed because the son, daughter, even mothers and fathers are destroyed by the fentanyl pouring in and drugs pouring in. Well, they're not coming in by sea anymore, so now we'll have to start looking about the land because they'll be forced to go by land. And let me tell you right now, that's not going to work out well for them either.
Welcome back to the Rob Maness Show here on Worldview Tube and our X Spaces simulcast. And it's more War Monday, and we're talking the new national defense strategy, both in draft but in action there. You just heard the President of the United States talking about his Western Hemisphere approach. And one of those is to engage in conflict with the drug cartels because one boat, 25,000 dead Americans. That is a number that we should never, ever accept. And my guest today is the former senior advisor to Secretary Hegseth, Dan Caldwell. And Dan, this Western Hemisphere defense is not just about the drug cartels, although that's very important. I mean, China is a big player in why we need to do this, isn't it?
Yes, absolutely. And, you know, since our nation's founding, our leaders, and I would say our, you know, until recently, generally recognized that the Western Hemisphere was the thing that was most important to us. It's because obviously, as I stated earlier, it's where we live. It's where our resources are that power our economy. And we're very blessed to live in a country that has, you know, abundant energy resources, abundant mineral resources, and ability to feed ourselves in large parts of the world. And then we also have things like the Panama Canal and the hemisphere that enable us to better trade between different parts of our country and in the region. And so something like the Panama Canal, for example, is fundamentally more critical to our prosperity and our ability to have a functioning economy than, say, who controls the Donbass in Ukraine or who controls the Anbar Desert in Iraq. It is literally very important. And so getting to the question of an outside power, in particular China, having control of that and having the ability to, say, shut it down to American commerce or jack up the rates that they charge the ships transitioning canal, it will have serious implications, not just on our economic prosperity, but on our safety. You know, I have to admit, and others who come on your show may disagree with me, I think sometimes we overhype the risk of China gaining influence or control in certain regions of the world. Like there's a big debate over what is China doing in Africa? You know, China having more economic investments in, say, sub-Saharan Africa isn't as big a threat to us as, say, them gaining control of the Panama Canal. That actually really matters to us. So when we're talking about the threats to the Western Hemisphere, to your point, I think a lot of people think about it just through the immigration realm or the risk posed by drug cartels. But you're right in saying that's not the only risk. I also say as well, too, is that there's also significant issues that are at play when it comes to certain countries and other you know, groups in Latin and South America, that if these countries become more destabilized and there's more issues with you know, governance issues and stuff, that impacts us more as well too, because it leads to more immigration, more pressure on our southern border, more economic disruption than, say, having a failed state in Africa or the Middle East. And again, this goes back to our histories. You had the Monroe Doctrine, which was about concern about Europeans after the Napoleonic Wars, and then you had the chaos in the colonies that were previously controlled by the Spanish, that certain European powers would come in and exploit that. And then you had the Roosevelt corollary that dealt with instability in Latin and South America come into play. And so it's really kind of a return to our traditions and past, what guided the early part of our republic's foreign policy.
Yeah, it is. With the Chinese companies, I don't think a lot of people understand that a Chinese company is usually controlled by the People's Liberation Army, from what I've seen, or some arm of the Chinese Communist Party apparatus in the government. When President Trump first took office and Secretary Hegseth got confirmed, I think his first trip was to the Panama Canal, wasn't it?
Yes, I think it was the
Something.
second or third trip, but it was
Yeah.
a very, very early priority I can't get into some details, but it was, one of the several of the first big meetings is that right away, day one, even before Secretary Hegseth was confirmed, because he was confirmed a few days after the inauguration, is that Defense Department and the staff there were laser focused on the Western Hemisphere. First and foremost, getting control of the border. And then once we had a plan in place to do that, forces were flowing there, things were getting in place, we were working well with Department of Homeland Security. We started looking beyond the border at the things like Panama Canal, the threats posed by drug cartels and other groups in Latin and South America. And so it has been a bigger and bigger focus of this Defense Department, I think, at any point since the end of the Cold War.
Yeah, definitely. I was mentioning the Chinese companies because it was reported that there were the ports at each end of the canal had companies from China that were controlling those port areas at the time that the president took office. I mean, that's very, very concerning. And when you hear things like, well, they want to go into the Arctic region and Greenland. But when you see the president's policy focus on those pieces of it, it tells me that the team is really looking at everything from the perspective of China to ensure that not only that we have our bases covered, but we have a plan in place to shore up where our weak areas are. Am I right about that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I have to say is that, again, it hasn't gotten as much coverage, but this administration, through the State Department, Department of Defense, Department of Homeland Security, has secured some big wins in ensuring that the United States maintains control of critical economic and security resources in the Western Hemisphere. Is that we have we are more confident that the Chinese will not be able to block off access to the Panama Canal as a result of the things that this administration did, particularly in the first 100 days. Those companies are no longer dominant in controlling the canal. We have American troops back in Panama doing regular exercises. There hasn't been an invasion like some people said they were. We're able to work with the Panamanian government effectively, develop stronger security links with the Panamanians, and the end result has been that canal is more secure than I believe in any point since the end of the Cold War.
Are there any other countries, like Greenland is specifically a very strategic importance because of its position in the Western Hemisphere, but are there any other countries in South America that we need to be concerned about that would show those same weaknesses if we don't make sure we're on top of it?
So just real quick on Greenland, again, the President Trump is returning to our past in a lot of ways. Multiple presidents, especially in the Cold War, World War II, and even before that, recognized the importance of Greenland. Going back to the 1800s, is that this is a area that's resource rich. It allows us to project power into the Atlantic. It controls key Arctic sea lanes. And, there were serious discussions in the 1950s of the United States annexing Greenland. And where we're moving towards is maybe it's annexation, maybe it's not. But at the very least, we're making progress in focusing more critical military resources there in a way that not just the Chinese, but potentially the Russians could get control of. And it helps make us more secure in our homeland. And again, it's another area that's more important to us than, say, the Middle East or some part of Africa or Eastern Europe. Now, in some of the other issues that we face in the Western Hemisphere, obviously Venezuela is a concern. Now, I'm somebody, and I don't speak for the administration anymore. I actually There's a lot of stuff in the media you can't believe. I don't know what their policy is. The Maduro regime is obviously not a good one, and I think there's evidence that they are allied with certain drug trafficking organizations. However, we need to be mindful of the risks of conducting another regime change war, this time in our own hemisphere. Is that there could be some issues there where we unintentionally create a South America, Libya situation, and we have another major wave of migration that puts pressure on our border. So that's a country we need to take a close look at. But that's an area where I would advise some prudence and ensure that we aren't doing things that could make other problems worse.
Yeah, I totally agree with that, Dan. I like the fact that we put a naval presence like the ARG group and the MU down in that area, along with its logistics support capabilities. But I see that as more of a deterrence to other actors like Russia and China and Iran, all of whose navies have operated in the Caribbean and in that southern Gulf of America and those kind of things, in addition to handling the Venezuela situation. We got to take one more break. When we come back, though, I want to spend this last segment talking about nuclear deterrent forces, because we mentioned submarines earlier. That's critically important, but we can also leverage that capability and the manufacturing that goes along with it to maybe improve our manufacturing abilities in things like ships, aircraft, that kind of thing, if we focus on updating our nuclear forces. We'll be right back with my guest, Dan Caldwell.
News is moving faster than ever, and so are we. Worldview Tube brings you 24/7 live stream coverage and now real-time alerts when it matters most. Once you have the Worldview Tube app installed, exit the app and navigate your way to Settings. In Settings, locate the tab labeled Notifications. Select the Notifications tab. Scroll down until you locate the Worldview Tube app icon. Select the tab, and here you can turn on and customize your notification experience for the Worldview Tube app. News doesn't wait, and neither should you. Turn on push notifications to stay informed. Every headline as it happens.
We were a little bit threatened by Russia recently, and I sent a submarine, nuclear submarine, the most lethal weapon ever made. Number one, you can't detect it. There's no way. We're 25 years ahead of Russia and China in submarines. Russia's actually second in submarines. China's third, but they're coming up. They're coming up. They're way lower in nuclear too, but in 5 years they'll be equal. They're coming up. And you don't have to be that good with nuclear. You could have 1/20th what you have now and still do the damage that would be, that'd be so horrendous. But I announced that, based on his mention of nuclear, and it was really a stupid person that works for him mentioned the word nuclear, I moved a submarine or two, I won't say about the two, over to the coast of Russia, just to be careful, because we can't let people throw around that word. I call it the N word. There are two N words, and you can't use either of them. You can't use either of them. And frankly, if it does get to use, we have more than anybody else. We have better, we have newer, but it's something we don't ever want to even have to think about. But when somebody mentions it, that submarine started immediately thereafter. And it's just lurking, but I'm sure we're not going to have to use it. But it's an amazing, it's undetectable, totally. Ours is, theirs isn't. Theirs are totally detectable. We can detect them easily. We go right to the spot. But we have genius apparatus that doesn't allow detection. It doesn't allow detection at all by anybody above water or below water. It's incredible. We're way ahead of everybody in that and other things.
Welcome back to the Rob Maness Show. It's More War Monday, and today we're talking about that man's new national defense strategy and America First national security policies. President Trump talking about how he's used nuclear forces. And my guest today is former senior advisor to Secretary Hegseth, Dan Caldwell. Dan, I wanted to spend just a little bit of time talking about our nuclear deterrent forces because you notice neither one of us has mentioned Russia throughout this entire show, and we've covered where our priorities are. But this has to be a priority because this is the one area where we need to make sure we're paying attention to Russia as a strategic threat, right?
Correct. I mean, Russia, in terms of its conventional capabilities, is actually very limited. The Russian military can't take Kharkiv. It sure as hell can't march into Warsaw or Berlin. However, as you're alluding to, it still does possess 6,000 nuclear weapons, a nuclear triad, the ability to deliver nuclear weapons via aircraft, submarines, and land-based intercontinental ballistic missiles. And so they are still a significant nuclear power, and that's why we still need to pay attention to them. In terms of our own nuclear deterrent, it is the ultimate guarantor of our survival as a nation. It is our ultimate backstop. And it is key to our national security strategy and has been since we detonated the first atomic bomb. Unfortunately, we have not significantly updated our nuclear arsenal in many decades. Our main intercontinental ballistic missile, the Minuteman, most of the Minutemans we have in service are going on 50, 60 years old. Many of the nuclear gravity bombs that we have, even though they've been updated, are just as old. As President Trump was alluding to, our submarine-based leg of the triad is in much better shape. We do have a lot of good capabilities there, but even that is starting to age. Many of the Ohio-class submarines that we use are going on 40 years old. So we're in the midst of a nuclear modernization program right now. It is very expensive. Unfortunately, there were some bad decisions made by previous administrations that have increased the cost of that program. But it is absolutely critical that we maintain a nuclear deterrent. I think there's a lot of great arguments to be had about what that looks like in the future. Whether we maintain all three triads, whether we limit one or we invest more in another. But it is key that we maintain this capability because it is truly the ultimate deterrent. And again, I would argue our ultimate guarantor of survival as a nation.
Absolutely right. I was glad to see in the public information I've got on the new national defense strategy, there's a concerted effort to do a modernization, to field new technology platforms. And they've made, it appears, the Golden Dome missile defense concept as part of that overarching strategic force that this NDS is going to set out goals to improve that and make sure that it's that we last until for long enough to where we can defeat any adversary that tries to take us on from a nuclear perspective, especially. The Golden Dome itself, though, are there any solutions to this mentality amongst the service chiefs, Dan? And I don't know if you saw this when you were last working in the Pentagon, but I've seen it over and over again. From the end of the Cold War, we got in this habit of robbing Peter to pay Paul between the services. And I wrote a little article about it a couple of weeks ago where the Air Force Chief of Staff was mentioning something about the Army's budget is insignificant. We should take money from the soldiers' budget and cut 100,000 soldiers out of our limited ground force now and put it towards more bombers and vice versa, ships coming from the Air Force budget and those kind of things. Can we get to a point, you think, under this president and this administration where we're looking at it more from a Cold War perspective, where we're building out each of our services capabilities to the max extent that we can so that it meets the threat?
Well, I would say that I think we want to have a capable Army Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps, Space Force. We want to have capable services that aren't hollowed out. At the same time, though, we have to recognize that we live in a resource constrained environment. We have a $37 trillion national debt, and yes, there was significant amount of more money for defense spending, one-time plus up in the One Big Beautiful Bill, and that provides funding for priorities like Golden Dome and shipbuilding. So there will have to be times where the Air Force and Navy are maybe getting a bigger share of the pie, because for a long time the Army was getting a lot of resources for the global war on terror, since that was a very Army and Marine Corps centric war. But it doesn't mean that you have a hollowed out Army. It means you have a more focused Army that is focused on fewer priorities and is actually investing in capabilities that allow it to punch above its weight. And I'm not going to get into, should the Army be bigger or smaller? That's a live debate right now that I don't want to touch with 30-foot pole. But there is times where there are going to have to be trade-offs. But what we've done, unfortunately, in the past is we've allowed a much bigger or hollowed out force to exist that really doesn't serve anybody, as opposed to looking at like what the Marine Corps did in Force 2030 and say, okay, we have a limited pot of money. How do we make ourselves more lethal? And they voluntarily cut Marines. They divested systems they didn't need anymore. And it freed up money and resources to build a more lethal force that was better able to meet the threats of the future.
Yeah. As we look to that future and the Golden Dome, do you think that we will remove other capabilities like our long-range bomber forces, or reduce them dramatically in order to build the Golden Dome, since we're now going to go into a defensive system mode that we've never envisioned before, because we've decided intentionally not to go down that road, and now we are. How do you see the force shaping, shifting around, or will it shift around? Or are we just going to add the Golden Dome concept to what we already have?
Well, if we cut our long-range bomber force, and Rob, I'm not just saying this because you're a bomber guy. I mean, that's, cutting off your nose to spite your face. I think we need to be, if there's, one aircraft I think we need to be buying more of, it's the B-21s that are replacing the B-1s, B-52s, and I think eventually the B-2s themselves. That is one program I'd be increasing the size of. I think that in regards to Golden Dome, it's important to remember is that there's several different layers to that. There's still a lot of science and research that needs to go into determining how we're going to do some of those things. But I would argue that with Golden Dome is that there are things that we can be doing now and investing money in now, where you have proven science and technology and equipment that we should be investing more in. And that in particular should be the counter drone, counter UAS side of things. Because I think that if an adversary like China was going to strike us, I don't think they'd strike us first with a nuclear weapon. I think they'd strike us with what the Ukrainians did in Russia with Operation Spiderweb. They had all these shipping containers and trucks with lethal drones that swarm the airfields. And you have the cartels, you have other non-state actors with those capabilities. So that's something we should be investing more in right away. And that's not just DOD, that's also Department of Homeland Security. So they need to be investing more in that. In terms of some of the other things that would require less investments of, look, I think that you'd have to look overseas. I think that many of these systems are in places overseas where we don't necessarily need to be anymore. We should be bringing more of those back and integrating them more into our homeland defense, whether it's things like our THAAD batteries, our Patriot batteries, and then our counter UAS systems. So that's where I'd go first, is saying where we overseas, we don't need to be anymore, that we can bring them back here to fill gaps in our homeland before talking about cutting capabilities like long-range bombers, which should be absolutely, in my view, definitely not on the table in terms of trade-offs for Golden Dome.
And just to be clear, I'm not advocating for cutting long-range bombers.
Oh, I know you're not. I know you're not.
I just wanted to use a good example to get that discussion out there. We've just got a couple minutes left. Dan, I wanted to give you a chance to talk about what folks should be looking for, because here's two words that drive the insiders in the Pentagon especially crazy: Elbridge Colby, when thinking about alliances. And we've talked, and I think we're in straight alignment on this national defense strategy that's coming out here. That we need to focus where we should and de-emphasize where we can, and get our allies to do more, especially in NATO, in Europe, and those types of areas, and in the Middle East too. So, what should folks be looking for when it comes to us telling our representatives, our senators, what we want them to support, real quick, when it comes to that? Because there's a lot of pushback on that.
Well, for one, they shouldn't be passing things in the National Defense Authorization Act or appropriations bills or omnibus or continuing resolutions that restrict the ability of the administration to reprioritize resources towards our homeland and towards the Pacific. So we saw that in previous Congresses where they've tried to handcuff President Trump from withdrawing troops from Europe.